the traitor whose feet were burned, skin torn off, and was drawn and quartered in public. July 14, 1584, Delft, Netherlands. The air is thick with heat, sweat, and the stench of burning flesh. Thousands crowd the main square, jostling, gasping, silent. There's no music, no speeches, no celebration, only the sound of metal tools clinking on wood and the cries of a man tied upright at the center of the square. His name is Balthasar Gérard, and he is 27 years old. His feet have already been burned to the bone by red-hot irons, his skin torn piece by piece with glowing pincers. Now the executioners prepare for the finale, drawing and quartering, with 4 powerful horses trained for this gruesome task. 10 days earlier, Gerard committed what would be known as one of the most consequential assassinations in European history. He shot and killed William of Orange, revered as the father of the Dutch nation. A leader not just of political rebellion, but a symbol of Protestant freedom itself. But who was Balthasar Gérard before this? Not a mercenary, not a soldier, but an ideologue, a religious extremist. He was born in 1557 in the French Comté region, ruled by Catholic Spain during the height of the Spanish Inquisition. Raised by devout Catholics, Gerard was educated by Jesuit priests who instilled in him the idea that Protestantism was not just heresy, it was evil. They taught him that William of Orange was not a man, but the Antichrist incarnate, and that to destroy him would be a holy act. In 1580, King Philip II of Spain declared a bounty of 25,000 gold écus for anyone who could kill William, along with hereditary nobility and eternal absolution. For Gerard, it wasn't about the gold, it was about salvation. He spent years studying William's habits, infiltrating Protestant circles under a false identity. He even posed as a converted French nobleman, François Guillaume, to gain trust. His disguise was flawless. He memorized Protestant theology, debated doctrine like a true believer, and even wrote anti-Spanish pamphlets. In July 1584, Gerard finally secured a private audience with William at the Prinsenhof Palace in Delft. William, always accessible to his people, met with Gerard in a private study. What he didn't know was that in Gerard's leather satchel, disguised as a folder of maps, were 2 loaded pistols. As William turned his back to examine the maps, Gerard shot him in the chest at point-blank range, then fired again. William collapsed, blood pouring from his mouth. Gerard fled but broke his leg jumping from a window and was captured moments later. The reaction was instantaneous and feral. William wasn't just a leader, he was a national myth, a man who had bled for freedom. Delft erupted in rage. Crowds swarmed the palace, demanding vengeance. But the Dutch wouldn't just execute Gerard, they would make an example. His interrogation under torture revealed everything. His real name, his years of planning, his fanatical motivation. He never showed remorse, instead proclaiming himself a martyr who had done God's work. So they designed his death as a theatrical hellscape. On July 14th, the public execution began. His feet were burned, his flesh ripped off, and finally, he was drawn and quartered alive, his limbs torn from his body as the crowd roared in cathartic horror. But the story didn't end there. Gerard's mutilated remains became relics among Catholic fanatics. Pieces of his body were secretly collected and venerated. His death became legend, and his crime, far from destroying the Dutch resistance, turned William into a martyr, galvanizing the revolution. More than 400 years later, Balthasar Gérard's name still echoes as a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when faith becomes fanaticism, when propaganda replaces truth, and when revenge becomes ritual. Do you think he was a holy martyr, or just a mad pawn of kings and priests? Let me know in the comments. You don't become history's most hated assassin overnight. You're made slowly, deliberately, by faith, fire, and fear. Balthasar Gérard was born in 1557 in the town of Vuillafans, nestled in the Franche-Comté, a region under the iron hand of Catholic Spain. It wasn't a birthplace for rebels, it was a furnace for conformity. From his earliest days, Balthasar breathed an atmosphere thick with divine fear. The Spanish Inquisition was not a whisper in the background. It was a constant, thundering presence. His family was devoutly Catholic, loyal to the crown and to the Pope. But more than loyalty, there was terror. Terror that the growing Protestant Reformation, spreading like wildfire across Northern Europe, would corrupt Christendom and bring about its apocalypse. This was no mere theological disagreement. In the Spain-ruled Franche-Comté, Protestantism was seen as an existential cancer, and anyone infected had to be purged by fire if necessary. From childhood, Gerard was educated by Jesuit priests who didn't just teach scripture. They delivered visions of Armageddon, portraying the Protestant rebellion not as a political movement, but as a demonic conspiracy. He was taught that Protestants were not misguided Christians, they were the devil's agents. William of Orange, in particular, was not just a traitor to Spain, but the living Antichrist. These were not metaphors, these were orders. Any act, no matter how brutal, that eradicated this evil was not only justified, it was holy. The Jesuits didn't raise a child, they forged a weapon. By the 1570s, the Dutch revolt was well underway. William of Orange, a German-born nobleman who had converted to Protestantism, had become the political and spiritual leader of the rebellion. He was charismatic, calculating, and above all, dangerous to Catholic hegemony. For Gerard, William was not a man, but a mythic beast, the source of heresy and the embodiment of rebellion against divine order. Then came 1580. King Philip II of Spain issued a public proclamation. William of Orange was to be exterminated, like a wolf among sheep. The reward was staggering: 25,000 gold écus, more than enough to live as a nobleman for life. But Philip didn't just offer money, he promised hereditary nobility and, crucially, complete forgiveness of sins for whoever committed the act. To a mind like Gerard's, this was more than a bounty. It was a calling, a divine sanction, a path to eternal glory. Killing William was not murder, it was an act of salvation. What followed was a grim parade of failure. 2 years later, in 1582, a man named Juan de Yarragui managed to seriously wound William in an assassination attempt. But he was killed before finishing the job. Others tried and failed. Each failed assassin became fuel for Gerard's fire. Every setback was not discouragement. It was a sign that he was the one chosen to succeed. From then on, Gerard lived with a single obsession. He followed every movement of William's forces, collected sketches of palace layouts, memorized the names of advisors and guards. His education, originally intended for theology, was now channeled into espionage and deception. He wasn't just preparing to kill a man, he was preparing to destroy a symbol. He crafted an alias, François Guillaume, a fictional French nobleman who had supposedly converted to Protestantism and now sought to help the Dutch cause. It was a mask tailored with perfection. Gerard studied Protestant rhetoric, debated religious doctrine with ease, and even wrote anti-Spanish pamphlets that were circulated in secret among rebels. Over the next months, he slowly infiltrated deeper into Protestant circles. He attended services, donated money to the rebel movement, and performed every gesture of loyalty convincingly. He was patient, a spider spinning a web, one thread at a time. And it worked. His dedication appeared so genuine, his theological knowledge so authentic, that none suspected him. Not even those in William's inner circle. When he eventually claimed he had urgent intelligence on Spanish military movements, no one doubted him. He had spent years building that trust. One advisor, a close confidant of William, granted him an audience, an act of trust that would soon become one of the most regrettable decisions in Dutch history. Cross-checking Gerard's story, they found supporting evidence, supplied by Gerard himself through planted contacts. In July 1584, the moment he had waited for arrived, a private audience with William of Orange at the Prinsenhof Palace in Delft. It was the ultimate prize. Years of deception, devotion, and delusion converged on this single opportunity. William 51, weary from years of war, welcomed François Guillaume with the courtesy he extended to any patriot. He had no bodyguards in the room, only a secretary and a single guard. His security was light, his heart was open. He had no reason to fear. Gerard had already won. The only thing left was to pull the trigger. The perfect crime doesn't start with a bullet. It starts with a bow, a smile, and a name that isn't yours. By the summer of 1584, Balthasar Gérard was no longer the wide-eyed zealot from Franche-Comté. He had become François Guillaume, a fictitious French nobleman and supposed Protestant convert. He didn't just wear the clothes of nobility, he wore the language, the demeanor, the pious frustration of a Catholic-turned-rebel. Every word, every movement was performed with the precision of a master actor, his devotion rehearsed to the point of second nature. He infiltrated Delft not with force, but finesse. His story was compelling. A young aristocrat who had renounced his Catholic lineage, abandoned his homeland, and now sought redemption by joining the Dutch revolt. It was a narrative tailor-made for sympathy and for access. In a country under siege, any friend of the rebellion was welcomed with open arms, especially one so articulate, so generous, so convincing. Gerard attended Protestant services, sat through long theological discussions, and even contributed money to the cause. He authored anti-Spanish pamphlets, echoing the rhetoric of the rebel movement. His enemies believed he had become one of them. In truth, every coin, every phrase, every bowed head was a stone laid in a path toward premeditated murder. Midpoint hook. But the greatest trick wasn't what he said, it was what he never said, and what no one dared to ask. How did this supposed French nobleman have such deep familiarity with Spanish troop positions? How did he arrive so suddenly and insert himself so seamlessly into the web of rebel intelligence? The answer was hiding in plain sight. He had created the web himself. Over the previous year, Gerard had fed false tips into Protestant circles, only to later corroborate them as Guyon, building a false reputation on his own lies. His entrance into the political elite was slow and calculated. Starting from fringe gatherings, he gradually ingratiated himself with mid-level commanders, then advisors. He never pushed too fast, never asked for too much. Suspicion was a thread he never pulled too tightly. He played the long game, and the Dutch, desperate for allies, never questioned the cracks in his story. Then came the breakthrough. A trusted advisor to William of Orange granted Guyon a private audience, believing he carried time-sensitive intelligence from the front lines. Gerard's contacts, planted and manipulated by him over months, confirmed the details of his fabricated story. The stage was set. In early July 1584, word reached Gerard. William would receive him personally. The meeting would take place inside the Prinsenhof Palace, William's home and wartime command center in Delft. This was no coincidence. It was the culmination of years of strategic obsession. When the day arrived, Gerard did not tremble. Dressed modestly but with noble bearing, he carried a small leather bag. Inside were no maps, no documents, only two wheel-lock pistols, oiled and loaded, the tools of prophecy in the hands of a man who believed himself an instrument of God. The palace guards, used to seeing William welcome messengers and converts, let Gerard pass without suspicion. He was escorted into a private study, quiet, intimate, a room of trust. The rebel leader greeted him with warmth, asking for details about Spanish movements. For nearly an hour they spoke. Theology, strategy, hope. William, aged and worn from 16 years of war, found in Guyon not only a source of insight, but of renewed faith in the cause. He had no idea death sat across from him, and in that hour Gerard made no mistakes. He never flinched. He never blinked. He waited for the right moment. When William rose to examine a map on the table, his back turned. Gerard reached into the bag. Time stopped. With a shout, "For the glory of God and the Catholic King!" he fired the first shot. The bullet tore through William's lung and heart. The leader of the Dutch revolt collapsed, gasping, blood pouring from his mouth. Gerard fired again, sealing the fatal blow. Then came chaos. The secretary froze. The guard hesitated. Gerard ran. But fate, as ever, is a cruel playwright. On the stairs he stumbled. His legs snapped on impact as he leapt from a window. His body lay twisted. The assassinated hero above, the twisted zealot below. And thus ended the greatest impersonation of the century. Not with applause, but with a broken leg and a city's screams rising behind him. The moment the bullet struck William of Orange, the Dutch Revolution lost its voice, and the streets of Delft found their scream. July 10, 1584. News of the assassination spread through Delft like wildfire laced with gunpowder. In moments, the air turned electric. William of Orange was more than a politician. He was a father to the Dutch identity. His murder wasn't just treason, it was blasphemy draped in betrayal. As Gerard lay injured, twisted from his failed escape, the city roared. Citizens stormed the Prinsenhof. They weren't there to mourn. They came for vengeance. "Death to the Spanish dog," they screamed. Soldiers had to form a tight human barrier around Gerard to prevent a mob lynching. The crowd didn't want a trial. They wanted blood, flame, and pain, justice, Dutch style. While William's body was prepared for burial, Gerard's fate was sealed without a court. His interrogation began immediately. Torture wasn't optional. Under the unbearable crush of pain, Gerard confessed everything: his name, his alias, his mission. But what chilled the interrogators wasn't just the details. It was the pride. He declared his act holy, justified, anointed by divine command. There was no remorse, only certainty that he'd fulfilled prophecy. And so the Dutch leaders decided his punishment would be more than death. It would be a public spectacle of vengeance, a horror so absolute that it would brand itself onto history. They planned it meticulously, every iron, every pulley, every trained horse. Gerard wouldn't be executed. He'd be erased. If Gerard acted alone, why did he seem so assured, so prepared, so protected? Was he just a zealot or someone's weapon? The more Gerard talked, the more questions surfaced. His references to Spain's reward, his belief that King Philip would honor him with nobility, his calm in the face of unspeakable agony, everything suggested he was more than a lone fanatic. Could Spanish officials have quietly sanctioned the hit? If so, this wasn't just an assassination. It was an act of international terrorism, executed with royal blessing. The execution date was set, July 14th, 1584. The crowd would return, the city would hold its breath, and history would be carved into flesh. Drop your thoughts below. Was Balthasar Gérard a fanatic, a pawn, or a warning written in blood? Some executions are designed to end a life. Others are staged to define an era. July 14th, 1584. The morning sun over Delft was merciless, scorching the wooden scaffold built at the heart of the city square. From farms, villages, and market towns, thousands arrived, elbowing for a view. Children clung to their fathers. Women covered their mouths. Merchants abandoned their stalls. It wasn't just an execution, it was an exorcism. Balthasar Gérard was paraded through the streets in an open cart, his broken legs still bound crudely. As he passed, the crowd unleashed a fury rarely seen outside of war. Yet Gerard remained calm, unnaturally calm. He murmured Latin prayers, eyes lifted to the heavens. He believed he was ascending to martyrdom. The crowd saw only a monster. On the platform, he was strapped upright. The instruments of torture glinted in the sun. Glowing pincers, red-hot irons, chains. The horses waited, silent and tethered. Then the ritual began. His feet were burned first, iron pressed into the soles until flesh sizzled away. Then came the pincers, tearing strips of skin from his arms, his chest, his thighs. His screams echoed through Delft like the wails of a damned soul. But still he lived. The executioners were not brutes. They were artisans of pain, trained to prolong, to intensify, to make suffering visible. Every cut, every burn, every twist was calculated, not for punishment, but for spectacle. And yet, witnesses later claimed Gerard never begged for mercy. Some swore he smiled. For 3 hours, the city watched the unraveling of a man. As blood pooled and Gerard slipped between consciousness and agony, the final act approached. Ropes were fastened to his limbs, each tied to a separate horse. The executioner raised his hand, whips cracked, and the tearing began. Muscles snapped, joints exploded, bones splintered. The body resisted until it didn't. In a sound that survivors would later describe as the moment hell opened, Gerard's limbs tore from his torso. His heart still beat for moments more. Then silence, then cheers. His body, now a ruin of martyrdom and vengeance, was displayed publicly. But in secret, pieces were taken, smuggled by Catholic loyalists who saw him not as a villain, but a saint. The assassin's body had been destroyed, but his legend, like his victims, had only just begun. In the days following Gerard's gruesome execution, Delft returned to a haunted stillness. The scaffold was dismantled, the blood washed away, but the memory lingered in every crack of the cobblestone square. William of Orange, the man Gerard murdered, was buried with honors, his tomb becoming a sacred symbol of Dutch resistance. But Balthasar Gérard, his fate twisted into something far more unsettling. Though the Dutch state had displayed his mangled torso as a warning, it soon became an object of illicit reverence. Catholic loyalists, quiet, devout, and burning with their own convictions, began treating the remains not as the carcass of a traitor, but as relics of a saint. Reports surfaced of stolen flesh, hidden bones, pieces of the martyr's hair, and blood smuggled to France and Spain. In whispers, they called him the Blade of the Faith. The Dutch had tried to erase him, but instead they immortalized him. And here's the twist. In trying to destroy a fanatic, they may have created a legend more dangerous than the man himself. Gerard's crime didn't crush the Dutch revolt. It intensified it. Instead of demoralizing the people, William's assassination ignited a second wave of revolutionary fervor. His son, Maurice of Nassau, took up his mantle, rallying Protestant forces under a new, burning banner: vengeance and victory. The Spanish crown, which had quietly supported the bounty on William's head, was blindsided. What was meant to be a surgical strike turned into a symbolic disaster. Instead of silencing Protestant resistance, they had handed it a martyr of their own and handed Europe a chilling image of religious terrorism at its most spectacular. Artisans began to etch the scene of Gerard's torture into copper plates, spreading images of his execution across the continent. Pamphlets described every moment, every scream, every twisted belief. Writers penned poems, plays, and ballads, some hailing him as a devil, others, disturbingly, as a divine soldier. What was meant to be the end of a threat had become a new war cry. And through it all, the man at the center, burned, torn, and broken, lived on in ink, rumor, and flame. Tell us below, was this justice served or the birth of something far more dangerous than a bullet? History doesn't forget the loudest screams. It archives them. Balthasar Gérard's final breath did not silence the story. It multiplied it. Despite the horror, despite the spectacle, his name echoed through time. Schools whispered his story. Cathedrals condemned it. Taverns debated it. His execution had not buried the fanatic. It had crystallized him in the cultural memory of Europe. Gerard became a symbol twisted in two. To the Dutch, a treacherous monster dismembered in righteous fury. To radical Catholics, a martyr of the faith, a man who sacrificed himself to slay the devil they believed lived in William of Orange. And yet, his ultimate goal failed. William's death did not end the Dutch revolt. It inflamed it. His son, Maurice of Nassau, rose as commander of the rebel army and transformed sorrow into strategy. The revolution surged forward with renewed, ruthless energy. William's murder made him more powerful in death than he had ever been alive. Spain, by sponsoring the bounty, had intended to destroy a rebellion. Instead, it created a myth. William became the face of freedom, Gerard the face of fanaticism. Two martyrs divided by belief, bound by blood. The psychological impact of the assassination reshaped European politics. It laid bare the true cost of religious terrorism, of weaponized belief. Gerard was no longer just a man. He was a cautionary tale, a dark echo of what happens when faith erases empathy, when the promise of eternal reward justifies murder in broad daylight. Centuries later, historians, artists, and philosophers still revisit that moment. The gunshot in the Prinsenhof, the body torn by horses, the stunned silence that followed. And perhaps the most haunting part, Balthasar Gérard died convinced he had done God's will. 400 years later, how different are we? When belief becomes absolute, when enemies become evil, are we still one bullet away from justifying the unspeakable? Leave your thoughts. History listens.